wonderful letter. Every time somebody reads it, I get something new out of it. So, what did you get out of it today, Elizabeth? What stood out for you?
For me, a couple of things. Always depending on people and circumstances, and also let us surrender or continually surrender. That is so hard for me. I think that's why I
What
think
what makes
that's
it
that's
hard?
why I'm here.
Yeah, what makes it hard? Do you have a sense of what makes that difficult to surrender those things?
I feel that as recovery evolves, I think I have an idea that I'm already surrendered, but then something happens, some other things show up in life, and then I see, oh, I'm so dependent.
Yeah.
I still think, and I identify as an Alanonic person, codependent. So I find, oh, wow, look at me, I'm still pulling strings. I still think I know better, or I still think that if if I were to do better, if someone else did things differently, we would not be in so much trouble or whatever. So it's just like a new discovery every time. And
Well, it's a curious process, isn't it? Is that as soon as we think we've somehow come to some understanding and some new relationship with this issue, then we have an experience. It's almost like we continue to get reminded that there's more work to be done. It's like, this humility is such an important part of it, is to understand that we never finally integrate all this stuff and get to the top of the mountain. It's just continuing to be a journey trying to get up there. And I think that, if you can keep that perspective, it keeps us from becoming disheartened or disillusioned.
yeah.
Because it's important to understand that I remember somebody said, wouldn't it be great if we all had a bumper sticker on our car that says, please be patient with me. God isn't finished with me yet.
Yeah.
Please be patient with me. God,
Beginning with me.
that's right. Well, we have to be patient with ourselves. You're
Yeah.
right. See,
Yeah.
that's what I'm kind of saying at this point in time is that
Mm.
our compassion and patience with ourselves is that's where it starts. Right.
Yeah. Well, and
Yeah.
if I could share something really quickly, because I think my mind tells me, oh,
Yeah.
I've gotten up in the recovery process as if it's
Yeah.
climbing a mountain, but it is whatever shape it takes. I don't know. It's a spiral, wherever it is. If I'm not open enough or patient enough, I can become very frustrated with myself because I have the expectation
Yeah.
that I should be, how many years I've been here. I've
Yeah.
read
Well,
books.
there it is. Yeah, that's right. You got it. You got it. And see, that's where I don't know if you remember, but when we had that talk about holding on to ourselves,
Mhm.
and I read the analogy that Dr. Snarch used about climbing a mountain. And he says, as soon as you think you've got the mountain mastered, you're in trouble. That's when you fall. When you focus on yourself and mastering yourself as you climb, that's when the climb becomes enjoyable. There's a lot of truth in that. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, here we go. We're well on our way in terms of digging into the 12 and 12 and what it has to say, what Bill's writings have to say about either a direct linkage to emotional sobriety, or I think we're going to take the liberty to extrapolate from some of what Bill is writing about and pointing out how it might relate to emotional sobriety, which we had to do a lot last time. But before I go further, let me share my slides with you here real quick. So Tom Potash and I are just coming back from a weekend up at the Wilson House. And this weekend I gave my first presentation on emotional sobriety and the 12 and 12. So I've got a few slides from that I want to share with you tonight. The first I want to talk, once again, I want to talk about the importance of understanding the relationship between the steps, right? This becomes a very important thing. But I'm going to have to undo this really quick and move something over because it's in my way. There it is. Okay. All right, there we go. So the way the steps are designed, from my perspective, is that they generate a certain kind of an energy. We're going to call that a charge or a tension or a need or desire. And that charge or tension reaches really a critical mass if we work this step well, and it propels us, it moves us in the direction of the next step. Now, it came to me when I was doing this presentation up at the Wilson House in Dorset, Vermont, that it really follows our experience in life. Because now, this moment is always moving to the next moment. So now, always is followed by next. And you can think about that when I work step one, the next is step two. So there's a certain charge that is developed in step one that's resolved in step two. Now, step one is the only step because there's nothing that's preceding it except all the preparation that we go through in our life to get through step one. But step one creates a certain charge and tension. I've described that as an existential crisis. Now, this also applies with the focus on emotional sobriety, and you'll see what I mean in a moment. The existential crisis, when we take our first step, and we're going to make a distinction between doing the steps the first time and then doing them the second time. And you'll see what I mean in a moment. But our first step was a step of desperation, as Earnie Larsen says. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable, that this disease, like Bill called it, a rapacious creditor that took everything that was important to us, that robbed us of everything that we loved and cherished in our life. Our values, our time with family, our dignity, our respect, our trustworthiness, it all went out the window. So in step one, I admit I'm powerless. I have this fatal illness, and within my resources that I have available to me, I can't do anything about this. So I'm in serious trouble. I've got this fatal illness and I've got nothing, no ability to cope with this. That creates a deep sense of hopelessness. And in fact, Bill Wilson describes step one as that recovery is based upon a pedestal of hopelessness that comes from taking this step. Well, we're in this crisis. Something needs to happen. So you can feel the charge that has built up. So step two comes along and resolves that charge. It says there is hope. Restoring our sanity or our soundness of thinking is the way we like to think about this, is a possibility. So now it resolves this existential crisis I had in step one, right? Because there is hope, but now hope without action is just, without affirmative action, is just fantasy. So a new charge develops in terms of me moving towards realizing, what do I have to do to bring this hope into an experience, a personal experience I'm having with recovery? How can I make hope personal? Is what happens in step two. Now, I love this, and Herb really pointed this out last time. I was aware of it as well when I was reading through the first step in the 12 and 12, and for reasons unknown, and we can kind of guess at it, but I'm not so sure we really know. Bill only addressed the first half of step 1 in the 12 and 12. He related the unmanageability of our lives to the effect of alcoholism and the mental obsession and the physical cravings that our disease creates. Even though later he will acknowledge how our emotional dependency creates an impossible way of life, it really wasn't discussed in his focus on step 1. But there are certain things we can imply from it anyway, which is what we did, is we talked about step 1. Now, Earnie Larsen, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives become unmanageable. Earnie Larsen, in his discussion of step 2, really asks us to take a second first step, this time focusing on our unmanageability, and the unmanageability that our basic flaw, which is emotional dependency, has created in our life. That is the second first step. Now, I had the insight when I was presenting at the Wilson House this last weekend. The truth of it is that we need to take a second step from 1 through 12, but this time focusing on our emotional dependency and our unmanageability that has created. And so we can rework all of the steps from this vantage point or from this perspective. So this is how Earnie described it. He goes, the first step is a desperation step. Until there is a first step, there is nothing. Stage 2 recovery, and think of stage 2 recovery as synonymous with emotional sobriety. Stage 2 recovery takes another first step. He calls it the second first step. With it, you become as serious about your living patterns and habits as you were about the addiction that brought you into the program in the first place. Your living patterns, your behavioral patterns, your habits, I would include in your attitudes. This second first step is about getting serious about how you have been showing up in your life, what you do, how you function, what drives you, what motivates you, how you behave. Bill talked about in his letter that we've got to come, and really confront ourselves about our Mr. Hyde that continues to show up in our life. That's the part of us that's emotionally dependent and makes all these demands on life and people to be a certain way. He says, until the second first step happens, there's no stage 2 recovery. We would say until the second first step happens, there is no emotional sobriety. Herb and I have referred to this oftentimes as just the second half of the first step. But I think Ernie's way of describing this is better, because there's no question that our addiction, whatever it may be, whether it's alcohol and drugs, sex, whatever, gambling, that creates an unmanageability in our life. There is no question about it. But the unmanageability we're focusing on here is the one that comes from what Bill calls our basic flaw. And that's our over-dependence on people, places, and things. The way I like to think about it is that we demand way too much from life and way too little from ourselves, or way too much from life and our relationships and way too little of ourselves. So as we go through step 1, we realize things like suffering is one, death is not easy. Bill says it a different way. We must awake or we die. Now, what are we waking up to in this second first step? The fact that our emotional dependency is what he called a fatal flaw. It creates an impossible way of life because we put the cart before the horse, because we demand that life and people conform to our expectations for us to be okay. And when that doesn't happen, we become highly manipulative and try to bend reality to our liking, to our wish. And we realize in step 1 that change occurs when one becomes what he is. This is called the paradoxical theory of change. Not when a person tries to become what he is not. But as soon as I own my truth, like when I say I'm powerless over alcohol, now I can discover a new power. If I say can face I'm powerless over my emotional dependency and where I am stuck in my development, then all of a sudden, and I realize that that's creating an impossible way of life, then all of a sudden I can discover how to grow myself up. But I've got to first admit that I'm stuck at this stage of development. That's what Bill says, that recovery is dependent upon a spiritual experience set upon a pedestal of hopelessness. What I am doing doesn't work. It's created countless problems and suffering and difficulty in the way I have experienced life, to the point where I had to drink to experience freedom from that, use drugs to experience freedom from that. So I won't go into this, but what we know is that every natural instinct cries out against us. Being able to admit you're powerless is something that no one wants to do, especially our false self. So you guys get a sense of the flavor of that. So this step has created an incredible charge, right? An incredible charge. And this is what Bill says in the 12 and 12. He says, little good can come to any alcoholic who joins AA unless he has first accepted his devastating weakness and all its consequences. This is also true about accepting our emotional dependency and all its consequences. What that emotional dependency has done to not only our relationship with ourselves, but with others and with life itself, and even our relationship with a higher power. I say it's created the biggest lie available, or the biggest lie possible, which is the lie is I need things to be a certain way for me to be okay. And I do not have the ability to cope with life as it is. I don't know how to deal. I will never be able to deal with my suffering. I will never be able to deal with being disappointed or disillusioned. Things have to be my way for me to be okay. That's the big lie. That's really has undermined our faith to be able to learn and to cope with life as it is. But this is so important in terms of the insight that Dr. Karen Horney had. She says, as soon as we become disillusioned with the solution that we've been applying in our life, she goes, with the possibility, with the weakening of the obstructive forces, let's say in this case of the false self that says I need everything to be my way to be okay, as soon as that becomes weakened, which is what the first step does, is it shatters our reliance on that idea, on that kind of a consciousness, the constructive forces of the real self have a chance to grow. And that's what happens. This 12 steps help us recover our lost true self, or our real self. And that real self is where emotional sobriety takes place. So here we are. We've got a crisis. We've got an existential crisis. We're immature. We're stuck in our lives. We don't know how to grow up. We don't know how to stand on our own 2 feet. And step 2 comes along and says, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. We could also read this, came to believe that a power greater than the consciousness that we currently have could restore us to sanity. I don't know if you have seen the videos I show about the Piaget's work about how the cognitive development of children determines their consciousness. But just a quick summary of that is that the pre-operational stage of development, which is 2 to 7 years old, a child can only focus on one dimension of reality. And typically the dimension of the reality they focus on is not the most relevant. It may be the most obvious, but that doesn't mean it's the most relevant. For example, if you take 2 glasses with juice in it that have the same size and the glasses are the same height, and there's the same amount of juice in each glass, and you ask the child in the first part of the experiment, do these 2 glasses have the same amount of juice? The child would say, yes, they do. They're the same, right? Then you take one of the glasses and you bring in a tall beaker and you pour the juice in that glass into the tall beaker and slide the beaker over and say, now, do these two have the same amount of juice or does one have more than the other? The child that's from that age range, 2 to 7, will most of the time, unless they're incredibly bright, say the taller beaker has more juice in it. And when the examiner says why, it's because it's taller than the other one. The child is not looking at the amount of juice in the beaker. They're looking at the fact that the beaker is taller. So what we would say is that the child's consciousness, which is determined by their cognitive level of development, does not focus on the most important dimension of reality. Well, the same is true of our emotional development. Your emotional maturity creates a certain consciousness, and you use that consciousness to interpret reality and give meaning to it. Which means that we're not doing something that different than that child is. When we're immature, we're focusing on the least relevant dimension of reality, and no greater truth could be, or I should say, the best evidence of that is taking things personally. When we're immature, when we're stuck in our emotional development, when we're undifferentiated, we look at what other people are doing as a reflection of how they feel about us. When it has nothing to do with it, just like the tall beaker doesn't have more juice because it's taller. People don't do what they do because of how they feel about us. They behave the way they behave, and they act the way they behave based on who they are, not based on how they feel about us. What we're seeing in their behavior is a reflection of who they are, not about how they feel about us. It takes some maturity to see that all the time. So, step 2 resolves the existential crisis that follows the surrender, the admission, the hopelessness that occurs from admitting that we're powerless and that our lives have become unmanageable as a result of the stuckness we have in our development. You see, I say our problem is not that in terms of the emotional issue here, it's not that we're sick, we're stuck. And our development has been delayed. We are stuck at an early stage of development. And what the hope is that we can grow up. That we can, our maturity can be restored. We can reignite the process, so to speak. We can stoke the flame of development. And that's what this step is about. Bill defines sanity in this step as soundness of mind. Herb has said this a lot, and I see this too as a great way of thinking it. Our emotional dependency creates a lack of soundness of mind. We are not able to look at reality as it is. We look at reality in terms of taking it personally. That's what happens when we're stuck in our development. It's all about me, 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 me. That's why Bill talked about selfishness. Self will run riot. That we think is the root of our problem, because that's where we're stuck. Now, this is important. Bill says that this step 2, it's the beginning of the end of our old life and the beginning of the emergence of a new life. The old life, the life that was based on what we call environmental support, looking for our environment to provide us with our self-esteem, our environment to provide us with support, to help us be what we can be, etc., etc., etc. The beginning of the emergence of a new life, because that old life that's based on environmental support creates an incredible amount of emotional dependency. And the beginning of emergence of a new life is with the possibility of achieving this emotional autonomy, where I can stand on my own 2 emotional feet. I don't need to lean on you. Now, that doesn't mean I don't need you, but I take the responsibility of functioning in my relationship of trying to get my needs met instead of expecting you to meet my needs. That's the important thing here in terms of what's going on. So Bill says, well, what creates a resistance to experiencing hope? Talks about being disillusioned with religion, religious abuse, intellectual self-sufficiency or self-reliant. I put down injunctions and interjections. Well, how do these apply to emotional dependency? Sometimes some of the messages we got in our life was that we just had to turn this over, and if we were doing God's will, we would be okay. It diminished our participation in our life. Religious abuse, we can think of it as therapeutic abuse. We can think about it as being disillusioned that there's really no one out there that can help us grow ourselves into what we can be. Not being able to see that if I can give up some of this self-reliant or self-sufficiency, I may be able to tap into a force that's much more powerful within me. I like to think of it as that force of that growth force that moves us. That is an imperative. It moves us towards what we can be. I think that's God within us. That's the way I like to think about it. But then also in terms of this growing up, is a lot of us have had injunctions, meaning we are told that don't be happy. You will not be able to enjoy your life. You're a loser. We get these messages early on in our life and they become real obstacles until we deal with them in terms of what the possibility is, in terms of even developing the ability of hope. Because with developing hope, if I don't believe it's really possible, I'm going to fight against it because I don't want to be hurt again. I don't want to get hope and then be devastated that things aren't going to be different. So when hope is based on fantasy, we are much more likely to be disappointed. Okay. All right. So Bill said, as we encountered AA, the fallacy of our defiance was revealed. Talk about our defiance is this idea that I can somehow figure it out or somehow somebody else is going to come along and rescue me. In no time had we asked what God's will was of us. Instead, we had been telling him what it ought to be. Belief meant reliance, not defiance. In AA, we saw that the fruits of this belief, we saw the fruits of this belief, meaning we saw people meet and transcend their other pains and trials. We saw people calmly accept impossible situations, seeking neither to run nor to recriminate. We saw people begin to grow up. That was the basis of what I would call authentic hope. Hope based on being able to struggle with these issues in a way that really gives us a chance to become what we can be. So, that hope is very important in terms of us being able to believe that we can transcend our emotional dependence and learn how to be able to stand on our own two emotional feet. So, with that being said, let me open up the room and ask my discussants to join me and share their perspectives.
I'm no longer a co-host, so I can't pin anybody.
Ah,
I've
well, we're
lost
going to make co-host.
lack of powers.
Yeah, you need me to give you the power, don't you? I like that. I just gave it to you. I was going to get her. I was going to get you. You get yourself then. You get
Yeah.
Julia.
Once I'm empowered, I'm
Oh man, he's rolling. He's rolling. Okay, gentlemen, good evening and good evening, Julia. Herb, you want to kick us off and then Julia and then Tom will come in and share their perspective.
Sure. The first, the dynamic that you described in terms of the tension and release. Um, the insight that I had is that the steps are really constructed to respond to human nature as our brain is constructed. I need to know something in order to be able to do something. The two words I use are that I have a mind that knows, and I have a willpower that makes decisions to take actions. And all of the even steps are knowing steps. And all of the odd steps are decision steps and action steps. So I need to know something and then do something and have an experience, which gives me some more information to take some more effective action, which gives me a deeper experience, and the cycle continues. And that's a transformative cycle. Now, it's not necessarily coming out of the 12 and 12. I need to spend actually more time with it, but uh, it really talks about releasing it really reinforces what you reinforced last time, and that is about the set aside. This is an area fraught with so much information, misinformation, distorted information, and feelings, positive and negative, strong, deep, prejudices in the truest sense of the word prejudgment. And I know that it is what impeded me, not that I felt any negativity and or prejudice coming in, because of course my background made me very open to spirituality and the word God and the journey and the seeking and all of that. But the blind spot in me was that all of that preconceived information prevented me from actually understanding and experiencing the process that was outlined in the big book and supplemented by the 12 and 12. And it was 10 years in AA. Now, the blind spot didn't prevent me from having wonderful transformative experiences. My concept of God, even though it was a traditional concept, which in fact I found out later on that I didn't really have personalized, that was not an impediment to, in fact, the effectiveness of the process. But what I became aware of at 10 years of sobriety was that all of that knowledge was the very impediment for me to have a relationship, a personal experience and a relationship with whatever it is that at that time, 1994, actually 1996, when I did the work of the steps for the third time. And then I got a lot more understanding, certainly, of the process outlined in the big book, which is a phenomenal process of coming to understand and experience what faith is. And that's that choice. Without any information, without any certainty, without any feeling necessarily attached to it, Bill invites us in the big book. Now, I'm not talking about the 12 and 12. He says, God is or God isn't. Faced with, and you said it, Alan, and the 12 and 12 talks about faced with the death sentence of step one.
That's the desperation.
That's the desperation. Faced with that, are you willing to choose that there may be a power? And he talks in the 12 and 12 a little bit about the perception of people in the meetings that they're happy and this is working and people are sober, without ever getting into the mechanics of the steps and or whatever else, just the observation line. They have what you want. If in fact you're coming in and you're resisting this spiritual vocabulary or concepts, it's kind of like, well, they have what you want. They believe this. Are you willing to at least set aside the thoughts, the feelings, the past experiences that you've had to just explore the possibility? And the best part about it, of course, the big book emphasizes your concept, not our concept, not the big book's concept, not your parents, not religious, but whatever it is, will you believe that it is? That's it. And so I'm stopped there.
Julia.
Thank you, Herb. Yeah, two concepts I think stood out to me. One being openness to new ideas and experiences that we talked about. And the other being that recovery, like emotional sobriety, is a process. And I'm not going to understand the definition until I, do some of the steps. And I came into the program really wanting to understand everything. I think I may have mentioned this before. I was so scared. I wanted to really be clear on what I was getting myself into and what I was committing to. But the irony was, like, I am not going to understand a spiritual awakening until I take the steps and have a spiritual awakening, because I don't have the consciousness that you talked about to be able to imagine that, right? And that required open-mindedness at a time when I, was really struggling with that. That was tough. But like you talked about, Alan, the drive from that first step, that desperation, it was like these two choices. And it was very clear to me, if I kept going the way I was going and using my old ideas, that it was becoming very clear it didn't work. Something very bad was going to happen. And my sponsor used a phrase that really helped me, that we hear in the room sometimes, which was, if you're not willing, are you at least willing to be willing? Are you willing to open your mind that much? Right. And that gave me a start. I think, Herb, you said last time, we're so addicted. I was so addicted to my own ideas and opinions. And one of the most helpful things I've learned in the program is, like, to be willing to be wrong, to be willing to, and I think recovery really does require that amount of humility. So does science, actually, which is, I've seen some people get into a lot of trouble because they're so addicted to what they've put so many resources in, even though it's clearly the data isn't backing that up. And that's also you're not in alignment with reality. And that's never served me. Yeah. And again, the other part being, like, this is a process, and I have to meet myself where I'm at, not where I think I should be. Like somebody was saying at the beginning of this meeting during the reading, that can be frustrating. There is that, oh, I've been sober this long, I've been working the steps, I should, insert whatever. But it takes, I don't know, it takes willing to continue to practice, to make mistakes, self-acceptance. And those are all really easy things to talk about, and in real life are really hard to practice. So
When did you start taking a second first step, Julia? Do you relate to that concept of this, or second first step? We'll talk about.
I heard the idea of emotional sobriety very early on, and I remember asking my friend, like, what is that? And she said, don't worry about it. Just worry about not drinking today.
It's quite common. Yeah.
The idea of the unmanageability I've heard thrown around, and some people discussed it as the unmanageability that came from drinking, and that was very clear to me. But then I related more to the idea of, what's the reason that I drank in the first place, and what are all the things that are causing me pain now, completely, sober. I haven't had a drink for a while. And there are still things that I associate with alcoholism. So I don't know. I started getting those ideas from different sources and just different perspectives. They were different words, if that makes sense. But they sort of pointed to the same thing. And I started listening to your podcast about 2 years ago, and also joined a group of women, and I started a group where we talk about emotional sobriety. So I can't point to a particular date.
No, it was kind of a growing
Yeah,
critical mass.
growing awareness.
Yeah,
Yep.
growing awareness that, as we talk about it sometimes, I love his analogy of thawing out.
Mm.
It's like you started to wake up into a consciousness that was ready to embrace these ideas. And it really is a consciousness. And I think it does come from a growing maturity and a growing sense that there's more here. And where is it? Where is it? There's something that's not complete yet. There's something missing from this. And I think if we pay attention to that, it'll lead us right here.
And just last thing, I loved what you said. I think it was on the podcast this week, and I quoted you at a meeting, that recovery is the discovery of new possibilities, and that requires humility. Like, I think that's such a great snapshot of recovery and emotional sobriety.
Thank you. I'm so glad that you've joined us in this and that you're willing to share your experience, because it's really
Glad to be here.
wonderful having a female energy from that. It's so different than all the old boys club that's been for so many years. So you're so welcomed here.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Julia. Uh, I have a couple things swirling around my head around this. And, one is looking at the first step in the way you described it. And I get to a place of increasing unmanageability because of my dependencies, right? And how I keep I'm gonna say like the rock, and there's nothing coming out of it. Trying to get water from a stone that is life, and trying to demand that it lines up exactly in my favor. Um, and in your book, you talk about um, waking up from our sleepwalking, and that's for me that's the unmanageability first step stuff. It's like we're suddenly realizing this is not working. Like this is no matter how hard I try. I can't arrange the actors, as Bill puts it. I can't get everything to line up just right to be okay. And I look in the 12 and 12 and on step two, and I just love this thing where it says, "Look what you people have done to us. You've convinced us that we are alcoholics and our lives are unmanageable." And it's the same way with emotional sobriety. It's like, look what you've done. You've woken me up, and now I'm seeing starkly how I'm putting all these conditions on all these relationships to life and reality, and continually being disappointed. And that's the charge discharge, right? So come to step two. I come to believe that there's some tools, some resources, some power that I could tap into that'll help me with, uncover these emotional dependencies, hopefully, mitigate my demands on them and the power they hold over me. And There was another piece which it came up. I don't know if you heard this weekend from some people, but in our emotional sobriety study group, it feels like there's in the community a sense of, I don't know, despair, frustration, disappointment that we're not there yet, right? That I'm still here when I think I should be here, um, and I guess it comes from the pain we feel from being stuck. But I go back to the 12 and 12, and it talks about the sponsor saying, take it easy. The hoop you have to jump through is a lot wider than you think. And that's where you talk about the spirit, right? The best of us inside of us that can help us achieve emotional sobriety. So if I can believe that the hoop is quite wide, right? That this spirit inside of me, this higher power, this connection to spirit can help me to get to the next step, and then I've got a fighting chance, and it gives me hope, which is really what a lot for me what step two is about. It's like there's hope, right? There's possibilities here. So those are some thoughts I had on what we've talked about so far.
Also, the emphasis that you made, Alan, on sanity. That's such an important discussion to have because most people connect it to psychiatric and or psychological meaning, and it has no bearing, none at all. You used the word health versus unhealthy, and that's what Bill meant by it. And what he meant in terms of restored to sanity is that we are no longer subject to the obsession, that it's been neutralized, that we have healthy thinking. Like 9 out of 10 people don't go the second and third time for suffering. Whereas 1 out of 10 people, the addicts, we have a tendency to forget the pain or at least minimize it so that we can, in fact, have the addiction or the soothing that comes from the addiction. And that's such an important concept that we're restored to health in the sense of we're realistic, connected to emotional sobriety, that we're healthy thinking, we're dealing with reality as it is, and we learn from our mistakes and we learn from our suffering, and we don't go like the moth to the flame anymore.
Well, I love that you emphasize that because that is the restoration of sanity for us is to not take everything so personally, right? Is to not make everything about us, me. And when I let go of that, I can perceive, just like the kids as they move beyond the 2 to 7 year range from what's called pre-operational thought to operational thought, they see reality for what it is. You pour that juice in the taller beaker, they're going to say, hey, that's got the same amount of juice. It doesn't matter that that beaker is taller than the other one. And the same thing happens for us is that when we start to move beyond this emotional dependency and our stuckness, we can now start to see reality as it is, Herb. That's such an important point. And that's the restoration of sanity. The restoration to be able to see reality as it is, not that's being filtered by our emotional dependence.
Yeah, I love the word disillusion because it means I had an illusion and I need to now dispel it.
Yeah, Renee says in the chat, it affects you personally, but it is not personal. It affects us personally because we take it personally. Dr. Kempler, my mentor, used to say, if you want to be more personal in a relationship, you got to stop taking things personally. I mean, he had such an insight in that. So next week, we're going to explore more of what it means to be hope and to have hope grounded in reality and what that looks like as another exploration of step two and step two as it relates to hope. And then 2 weeks from tonight, I'll make the announcement ahead of time, is that we will be getting into step three, and we're going to have a guest that night, Tom. Joe C.
Oh, nice.
Oh, good.
is going to lead our discussion of step three with Herb's help that night after Joe shares. You guys will love Joe C. He's just a mensch in my opinion. And I will be on a flight going to Canada to run a retreat up in Canada, so I won't be able to join you guys that night.
Well, the best news about Joe C is he's a proclaimed agnostic and atheist.
And that's why it'll be a very interesting. You and Joe juxtaposed to each other, right? It'll
Wonderful.
be a
Wonderful.
wonderful. I'll be watching that video. I'll tell you that. All right, everybody. Well, enjoy your night and God bless.